to speak at this important conference. I'd like to, in the first instance, acknowledge the country that I speak from, which is the country of the Bidjigal people in southwest Sydney. And I come to you from there, from stolen land that was never ceded. And it's a very important struggle for us in our union and across the broader community to see First Nations justice and a rectification of the abhorrent situation that many First Nations people find themselves in Australia. Again, thanks for the invite. My name is Warren Smith. I'm from the Maritime Union of Australia. We represent, in your language, dockers and seafarers. We say wharfies and seafarers and port workers, tugboat workers. And we're a union under constant attack from the employers, as so many unions are and so many workers are. And we note there's so many struggles that have been taking place in the UK recently, and congratulate so many UK workers and your unions, and express our solidarity with all of your struggles, being the same struggles everywhere in the world. Our union's got a long history in struggle around war and justice, in opposition to war and around social justice. It's ingrained, peace is ingrained in many respects into the fabric of the membership of the union through a long cultural, I suppose, exposure and activism around peace. 1 in 8 Australian seafarers died in the Second World War, and that wasn't that long ago, and those stories are passed down through generations and still alive within seagoing members of the union today. But both of our union's an amalgamation of what was wharfies and seafarers, and we've had a long history of fighting and struggling around peace, and operate on the basis of a slogan that peace is union business, core fundamental union business. And if we go back to 1938, we've seen wharfies refuse to load pig iron to Japan, saying it would come back as bombs and bullets. Again, we were pilloried and, ostracised by the community, but proven to be right. We've played a long role in Indonesian independence with black bands on Dutch ships from 1945 to 49, banned ships throughout the Vietnam War period by supposed nuclear power and nuclear weapons. And we've had bans on French ships with South Pacific nuclear testing. Played a big role around anti-apartheid, and our union was proudly organised and played a significant role in the international oil embargoes on South Africa. We opposed, obviously, Iraq and Afghanistan, called for the removal and withdrawal of Australian troops, the withdrawal of Russia from Ukraine, and the withdrawal of NATO and US forces from, fighting a proxy war in the same area. But as the topic of this session is AUKUS, the main focus of our peace work and that of the peace movement in general in Australia has been around AUKUS. The proposal is to, I'm sure most of you are broadly aware of the US, UK, Australia tripartite military escalation criminal alliance that proposes Australia buy 8 nuclear submarines at a cost of about $171 billion. Now, the defence budget in Australia is, like many Western countries have had forced on them by the dictates of imperialism, runs at about 2% of GDP. It's about 2.11% the Australian defence budget, which is $48.6 billion. So we're talking about on top of, and that's an astronomical amount that in itself, if even in the slightest way could be reduced, sees massive changes and possibilities arise socially with the health and education, a housing crisis, a cost of living crisis where workers are being squeezed, in childcare, in resolving a crisis in First Nations health and the general social inequality in that area. So it's an astronomical amount of money that really it's criminal to divert to the military-industrial complex and to ultimately the dictates of US imperialism, that enormous amount of social wealth that could be spent in the interest of the people. And that's been one of the significant arguments against AUKUS. But the cost is also social in terms of, it comes with military bases, and we've already seen military bases in Australia. There's plenty of military bases, and Pine Gap, for example, is the eyes and ears of the US operations. But you see around military bases restricted movement. Now, this AUKUS is not defensive. It's a drive to war with a focus on China. And it's mainly in the interests of US imperialism. And as I said, US bases are springing up. You go to Darwin, up in the north of Australia, it is a US base. There's over 2,000 US Marines stationed there, and you go across the wharf at any particular time, and it's full of Humvees and military, weapons, ultimately. So these nuclear submarines send a message of escalation of conflict. So they don't send a message of defense. This is purely a, imperialist escapade. And where, we find it disgraceful that the Australian government has, signed up to it in such a subservient way. And it shows the subservience of the Australian state to the dictates of US and the UK imperialist agenda. The other aspect which has been concerning is nuclear. We don't have nuclear power in Australia. And wharfies and seafarers don't want nuclear weapons, nuclear reactors in their workplace. Just don't want. Why would you? And, mistakes happen, accidents happen, and we will see a proliferation of US and UK nuclear vessels as well. And what's happened is, springing out of the woodwork of this is all the advocates of nuclear power. And again, some unions, unfortunately, jumping onto that bandwagon because they think that, they get jobs, and they're falsely pushing an argument that nuclear is a clean and green technology and the way forward. It also opens up in Australia the increase for uranium mining, because there's significant deposits of uranium. So the whole project is a ridiculous waste of people's money that is a pure drive for US corporations and UK corporations, ultimately for profit, and in the markets of China, ultimately. And they're prepared, obviously, to go to extreme lengths and prepare for war to get those markets. So the movement's incredibly important, and unity in the peace movement is always important. And the trade union movement and its involvement is critical in the peace movement. And war and peace are fundamentally class issues, and the working class organisations can't walk away from that, in our view. So we're active in a whole range of different peace movements in Australia through our branches, and nationally we're affiliated to the IPAN, which is the Independent and Peaceful Australia Network, a very broad network of peace organisations, the Australian Anti-Bases Campaign Coalition, and various state-based and local peace groups to try and build a movement. And most of these groups have had a focus around AUKUS, and national and local anti-AUKUS organisations have sprung up, in quite significant numbers, with some good actions taken, but not enough, and not enough impact. And one of the unfortunate aspects is that, it's not unfortunate that we got rid of a shitty Conservative government. That's always a good thing. But you've got a Labor government, and he's got exactly the same position when it comes to subservience to US imperialism. And the bipartisan support of the ALP, the Labor Party, and the Conservatives has made AUKUS basically completely accepted by the media and many in the community, which is unfortunate. So there's a lot of work to be done to turn that around. Just lastly, several trade unions have taken a position and a stand on this, which is really important, and it's been really good. We pushed a position straight away because it was in our workplaces, and we thought that our members have got a strong position of peace and in opposition to nuclear issues. The ETU in Australia is a very strong position anti-nuclear. The manufacturing union have put out a good statement in opposition to AUKUS. The tertiary education union and the teachers have got a strong tradition of peace activism and have been involved. And there's been obviously moving that through trades and labour councils in various different state trades and labour councils have endorsed an anti-AUKUS position, which has been good. We've also had international cooperation with the RMT and a joint opposition, which has been greatly welcomed by us. And we look forward to further bilateral work or, hopefully trilateral work, if we can find some US unions who are prepared to take a stand in the same way, but that's been unfortunately not that common. So, comrades, the campaign's got a fair way to go. They've got 3 sites, Brisbane, Newcastle and Port Kembla, lined up. I think that when a site is identified, the campaign will become more local, but it will also become much more intense. So there's a lot of work to be done in a campaign that needs to be defeated. These submarines are a complete waste, and they're just truly an escalation of war for all the wrong reasons. So thanks very much, comrades, and really appreciate the invite to speak.